topical, issues that concern the tech industry. And we begin this year with our first debate, which is on smart environments. Everything smart is being talked about, and we have a great set of people who are going to talk about what are the issues and opportunities in smart environments. I would like to invite our knowledgeable moderator for this session, Dr. Noah Rafford. Dr. Rafford is the advisor to the government of the UAE, where he fulfills a number of innovation and strategy roles. He's an expert in futures and foresight, on emerging technologies, and on design. He holds a PhD from MIT and is the co-founder of several technology startups. And most of all, he's somebody who knows a lot about smart things. Noah, join us, please.
Thank you all. Thank you for coming. Can you hear me? Yeah? Mike's good? So thank you all for taking the time to come explore this really exciting and quite broad topic with us. I mean, smart environments, that gets to the probably most historically epic buzzwords you could imagine. Everybody likes to be smart, and we all live in an environment and work in an environment in one way or another. So I thought I would just offer a few very brief introductory remarks and then introduce my co-panelists here, who will share some of their insights with you as well about what this means to them in their roles and how they see this realm moving forward in the next 10 to 15 years. I am a futurist by training. When most people hear futurist, they think sort of lab scientist guy scheming away about what the future is going to be like. But actually the reality of my job is a little bit more like this. It's a lot of combat in the trenches and trying to find new innovations and new partnerships, and that's not always the most comfortable environment, but it involves lots of action. And I think that's something that is true for many of my colleagues here as well. But there's one thing that we are trained to do when we're creating the future, and that's both anticipate the cars. So if you reflect back to the 1950s and 1960s, there's a tremendous amount of vision as to how automobiles and highways would transform urban environments and transform our lives. So as futurists and innovators, our job is not just to anticipate the cars, anything like the cars, but also the traffic jams and all of the systems and unintended consequences and secondary and tertiary impacts that these new technologies, new business models, and new ways of doing things might actually have. And this is where things get really interesting, because this is where you get deeper than just the marketing and just the sales pitches, and you get into how these things might actually truly fundamentally transform our lives, our families, and our ways of working. So what I've asked our panelists to explore, and this is something I'll introduce you each in a moment, is what are the most exciting things happening right now in smart environments? And that term itself, smart environments, is quite broad. This includes things like wearable technology, augmented reality, intelligent infrastructure, all smart homes, a variety of things which fall under this umbrella. And each of these gentlemen here are very well positioned to share what they're doing with you and also how they see the industry going forward, but also what happens after smart. So just to illustrate this notion, I want to show a little video here that was produced by some colleagues of mine in California called the Near Futures Laboratory. And it's just exploring what everyday technologies might be like in terms of facial recognition and things working, but not quite working exactly as they were planned. So you can see this woman is trying to get into her car, and it's a hand point recognition, and it doesn't quite work, so she has to get her hand working a few times. She drops her laundry in the back of the car, gets in for her optical recognition to start the car, but it takes a second or two. It doesn't quite work on the first time. That's a little bit like Siri. And then it recognizes her and starts her car. Now the truth of the matter is our everyday experience with technology is a little bit closer to this. It's never the kind of pure, pristine experience of floating icons and everything working seamlessly. It's actually always a little bit more dirty, a little bit more gritty, a little bit more prosaic and mundane. And that's why we chose this topic of everyday smart environments, because what we're trying to explore is how people are today trying to integrate these very exciting technologies into our lives, and what the everyday experience might be like in the future. So I'd like to introduce my three co-panelists here. starting with Ashish Punjabi. Ashish is the COO of Jackie's Electronics. I know Ashish through an industry association which we created together called the 3D Printing Industry Association. I'll let Ashish introduce himself and talk a little bit more, but he's one of the many innovators in the UAE who's pushing these technologies forward. And then Ashish Sidra, who is the VP of Digital Innovation. Gentlemen, why don't you just come up here and sit whilst I introduce yourselves. VP of Digital Innovation and Do, responsible for a lot of very cool things in this hall, which we'll tell you about. And then finally, Andrea Petti, who is the Vice President for MENA at Ericsson. Please, here. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ashish Punjabi, please, to share his concepts.
Good afternoon, everyone, and proud to be the first to speak at the smart sessions over here. This is Jitex. Basically, my background, I am the Chief Operating Officer of the Jitex group of companies. So we've got various different businesses, whether it be in retail, B2B solutions, and anything to do with tech. I love technology. I am on social media a lot talking about it. And together with people like Noah and PK, who's helped put this session together, we sort of like to think about what's going to happen in the future. My very basic example of where things have gone, where we've still lacked, is I look at Hollywood, and there are two examples that stand out to me from there. Number one is the movie Back to the Future, which came out about 30 years ago, where Michael J. Fox moves forward 30 years into the future. That 30 years is next year. We're nowhere near being on a hoverboard yet. So that's the first example of, I think, where we're still lagging. The second is the cartoon The Jetsons. And again, that was very futuristic 30 years ago. And we're nowhere near that. So when we start thinking about the future, and as much as we say we've come a long way forward, we've still got a long way to go.
I look after innovation in June. Having recently come to Dubai, I've really seen the energy in the city. I've been associated with technology for some time now in the telecoms and media sector. And coming here in Dubai, the key part is to look at what is coming ahead of us. And some of the things which are driving our outlook onto technology is how to make it citizen and user-centric. So what is very important is how to take it from using the word geeks to a everyday usage scenario. And some of the things in the smart environment space which we are now trying to focus on and you will be able to see it on our stalls is around wearables. And wearables in smart environments is something which we are trying to introduce in the enterprise space. We would have all looked at Google Glasses as a consumer product. What we have brought to the market this time around is wearables in the enterprise space where it can be used in field, out in the field to enhance productivity as a hands-free environment, and something which portrays or exemplifies what we believe should be innovation. A technology which can deliver tomorrow's benefits today. I agree with Ashish when he says we have a long way to go, but there are few things where we believe the future can be brought forward as well. So that's how we are looking at innovation.
Thank you. My name is Andrea Petti. I'm responsible for industry and society in the Middle East for Ericsson. Some of you may have heard our vision about network society. I feel kind of ambassador around this vision. And basically our motto is that when somebody gets connected, their life changes. If when everything gets connected, our world changes. So we are basically forecasting an environment in probably 5 to 10 years where we will have 50 billion connected devices. So everything will be connected. So we move from places to people to devices, and this is how we believe the world will evolve. From our side, we believe that we are on the verge of a transformation or a tipping point when we talk about what we are living, the ICT transformation, the ICT revolution. So historically, we see that there are cycles, or every 50 to 60 years, we have a kind of technological revolution that shifts the paradigm to a new techno-economic paradigm. And today we are at the tipping point of the ICT revolution. It usually starts with the financial crisis. We have one, so we expect this ICT transformation to really change our lives and our future. From our side as Ericsson, we are willing and we are committed to make the networking society happen through ICT transformation partnership.
That's great. Thank you guys for the introductions. What I'd like to do now is ask you to dig a little bit deeper into the preambles of your remarks. If I could start with Andrea. I was fascinated by you used the reference of Carlota Perez, who's the famous technology economist who talks about the two phases of technological revolution. And I agree, I think all of the data is that we're moving forward into the deployment phase. As I was gathering images for this presentation this morning, you found a lot of visions of mobility, for example, in the 1950s, and they're more or less the visions that we're still trying to implement today. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on the dreams and the kind of implementation phase which we might see in the next 10, 20 years or so as we deploy.
Actually, I can give some examples. I mean, what I feel is that, as you very well said, we are let's say in the tipping point or the let's say inflection point. And what I believe is that going forward, ICT will address a lot of current issues with new models. And our vision, and it pretty much resonates with what you're saying, is focus on end user. So you need to focus on end user. So in order to become smart, I usually say that in order to deliver a smart experience, the smart part of it is the citizen. Unless you have adoption and services that are relevant to the citizens, you cannot really drive the adoption at scale. So this is pretty much what we are trying to do by connecting, let's say, the different dots. I mean, you have information today, you have analytics. However, if you don't expose this to companies that are able to leverage like asset-like companies, and this is the model that we see going forward, just to answer your question, asset-like company that really play over the top on the existing assets in a country or in a city and make the assets usable in a different way and accessible in a different way. Unless you foster this development, then I see it difficult for the city or the county to become really smart.
That's a great example, and it ties in, Ashish, with something you were talking about earlier about trying to identify those end user needs and really focus on the things which provide maybe small but really concrete value right now. Could you share some examples of that, please?
See, just as a context where I was coming from, if you take smart environments to a city level, and if we see what is happening in Europe, what's happening in Asia, and what's happening in US, each of these geographic areas are driven by a very specific need. If you go to Europe, smart cities or smart environments is driven by the green movement, sustainability. If you go to US, it's more efficiency, etc. Asia, and if you see what's happening in China, in Japan, and I see my friends from the CCS services here as well, what they have been doing there is more advanced public service delivery. So the needs have been very different. The challenge where it comes is, it has started as if I go to the extreme of calling it a silo implementation. Smart in some cities is smart transportation, and the city calls itself smart city. In some cities it is smart utilities, but it becomes smart city. It's a very tech-led interpretation of smart. A citizen's life goes across these silos, goes across government departments. So it's about having that wide vision on what a citizen's life would look like. But believe me, this would be daunting, because suddenly what you have to do is to deliver everything which is smart. But unless and until we have that integrated vision and then pick up bite-sized deliverables, we will end up in a situation on one side would be cross-departmental silos, big mess, and secondly what we are coining as a term called sensor pollution. It's not far out in the future when Andre predicted 50 million connected devices, a lot of it would be sensors in cities working on cross purposes. Every department would go ahead and dig in their own sensors. In many cities, police departments and transport departments are having their own camera networks. Why? That is a real waste of government resources. When we start looking at it from this angle, that future city needs to be thought through top down, but picking up very small bite-sized deliverables to deliver a real smart city. And to pick up a quote which I heard in the corridors, it's no longer about smart, it's about being wise. So smart is a passé, and we are talking about wise cities now.
I think that's really important at the government level, where you're providing core services to help make people's lives better. It's also interesting as well, though, because as private corporations, in some way or another, you have to, at the end of the day, make ends meet. So Ashish, I'm wondering, you're on the pointy end of the retail stick. Could you share some of your experiences as to the types of solutions which people are finding a real need for now in purchasing?
I mean, it's been one of those fields that's been sort of interesting to me. And I was reading an article this morning in the New York Times about e-books and e-readers, and with kids, is it actually giving them the value as compared to a traditional book, or is it just screen time? The concept is there. The e-readers have been there. I use the Kindle app all the time. I read off there. For me, it's done the job of a regular book. For my kids, I'm old-fashioned. I've kept them with the traditional books because I don't think they get the same learning value out of an e-book at this stage. So it's a question of, you've got the technology, does it apply in that case? How do you get it there? With at least paper, at least with kids, I think they retain it a lot better. But an e-book type of environment, it's forgotten. So when you start thinking about the bigger picture in terms of how it fits in education, how does it fit in healthcare, and all these other places, it's starting to raise these questions. So it's a smart solution, but as Ashish said, it's not a wise solution necessarily.
I think those are wonderful examples. I mean, the great British designer Cedric Price has this quote, which I just adore, that technology is the answer, but what's the question? And I think at this stage, where a lot of our technological advances are getting to the point where we're really able to do incredible things with technology. We spent the last 20, 30 years trying to get us to this point. Now we're starting to grapple with, well, what are we exactly doing with this? And these are really social questions as much as they are technological questions. So I think the ebook example in education is really, really good. Another question then, if we're looking then at the social aspects of rolling these technologies out in a way that makes sense and is useful for people, what are some of the challenges which you guys are seeing to adoption or implementation of these?
Well, I mean, I can talk as a retailer. The big challenge is though we sell technology, we've been very bad at using technology within our own businesses. And I think this is the challenge of a lot of retailers today, is once you reach a certain scale, there are legacy systems that are in there that sort of inhibit any sort of future growth that's in there. It's a question of how do you get those systems and how do you keep it so that it's smart enough where you can keep innovating and keep growing it. We talk about investing, and yes, we keep investing, but are you investing on an old dog or are you investing on a new dog? And we're sort of stuck with that conundrum at this stage, I think. And I've said it to a lot of my peers in the industry, and I've said it to a lot of the brands we work with, is help us get there. Just talking about it, tablets is a fantastic example. The idea of a tablet is nice. The idea of a tablet in retail actually being used as a tool can go a lot further. It can be used as a sales tool, it can be used as a checkout tool, it can be used as a demonstration tool. But how many of us do that yet? So I think it's a question of how do you get past it, how do you get past your legacy systems, and move forward with that.
Anyone else want to reflect on that? Some of the challenges, please?
Challenges, I think, it